There are seven major trade partners for South Sudan, and they are China, India, Uganda, Ukraine, Kenya, Netherlands, and United States. China, India, Uganda, and Ukraine are South Sudan's top exports destination, with China and India being the top two. Every year, 1.16 billion worth of goods are exported to China, and 56 million worth of goods are exported to India. On the other hand, United States, Kenya, Netherlands, China, and Uganda are South Sudan's top import origin. South Sudan spends 253 million in import goods from Uganda and 161 million in import goods from Kenya every year. Looking at South Sudan geographically, we can use the gravity model to predict its potential trade partners. We found that South Sudan should already be trading with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Nigeria, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. They are all relatively big economies and fairly close to South Sudan, unlike China, United States, or Netherlands that's halfway across the globe.
South Sudan has a signed trade agreement with Uganda that creates a joint trade committee that will target trade problems between the two countries. The agreement was signed by Uganda's Minister of Trade and South Sudan's Minister of Commerce. The agreement is supposed to improve existing trade links. The organization called the Greater Arab Free Trade Area, or the GAFTA, has been established to take away custom duties and charges to all countries in the group. 17 Arab countries have been involved, including South Sudan. There has also been formed a Council of Economic Unity. The Council's goal is to connect Arab economies with one another and finally establish the Arab Common Market. South Sudan is a part of this council. The United States has a trade and investment framework agreement with the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. South Sudan is currently a part of this group. Subsequently, South Sudan was the United States' 167th largest supplier of goods in imports in 2010, and South Sudan was America's 139th largest exporter in 2010, totaling 115.6 million goods into the U.S. in exports. Since South Sudan has signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, Japan is now also giving them a lot of free trade and economic support.
In 2017, South Sudan's primary export was mineral fuels, resulting in 98% of their total exports, or $1.3 billion. South Sudan's other primary exports included vegetables, wood, oilseeds, cotton, machinery, and aircrafts. Its top imports were raw sugar, beer, postage stamps, railway cargo containers, and vegetable products. Overall, South Sudan resulted in a positive trade balance of roughly $700 million. In terms of growth, wood exports grew at 2,000% from 2016 to 2017, and cotton grew at 1,500%. With such a small impact on the global trade economy, South Sudan is seen as a peripheral country who supplies raw materials to more industrialized countries such as China.
South Sudan entered a bilateral trade agreement with Sudan in 2012. They implemented the border issue agreement to clear up issues along their border. Also, South Sudan has had long-lasting relations with Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. On March 21, 2018, South Sudan joined the African Continental Free Trade Area. Their goal is to create a single market for all countries involved to have free movement as well as a single currency. In 2016, South Sudan also joined the East African Community, whose goal is to widen and deepen cooperation among the partner states and other regional economic communities in political, economic, and social fields for their mutual benefit. A major oil distributor. The country also has lands rich with minerals such as gold, zinc, chromium, and copper. In addition to these minerals, the land is full of forest reserves and diverse flora that is watered by the Nile River. This could also be a potential tourist hotspot. Although South Sudan does have its drawbacks, such as their lack of infrastructure, continuing social and economic issues, as well as a lack of security in the rural areas, they would need to fix these serious structural issues before trying to distribute their resources over to other countries or even opening up their doors to tourists. And as a result of the civil war that broke out in 2013, South Sudan's lands and people have been plagued with poverty, and people are still suffering from these issues today.
With regards to infant industry protection in sunrise sectors in South Sudan, there are not many options for the country. Oil, which is South Sudan's largest export, is non-renewable, and so many countries are trying to become dependent of them. South Sudan's only potential sunrise sector could be gas turbine production, since this form of turbine accepts multiple different fuel types. As for infant industry protection, South Sudan hasn't released any of its tariff rates or quotas, which are some of the ways of protecting these potential industries. Recently, South Sudan has lifted subsidies on fuel production, which would be the opposite of an IIP course of action. This action was taken to relieve the South Sudanese economy, which was ailing under U.S. sanctions and also suffered from a lack of hard currency and a civil war. Moving on to cartelization, South Sudan's largest export is crude petroleum, worth $1.23 billion US. However, this only amounts to 0.03% of the world's crude petroleum exports. Since South Sudan doesn't have much else of an export, this would suggest that forming a state-led cartel would be the only viable option. Joining other oil-producing African states would not be enough to form a state-led cartel, since OPEC is already a cartel for oil and already controls most of the world's oil, not to mention that several African states have already joined OPEC. Therefore, joining OPEC would be the only chance of having an oil cartel. Since its formation, South Sudan has received invites to join OPEC and has also attended several meetings.
In order for South Sudan to develop their nation, they must engage in new forms of trade. For this to happen, they must seek out potential trade partners that can assist in their development. Potential partners could include nearby countries that engage in trade relations similar to their own. Similar imports and exports would allow for them to create new horizontal trade pacts that would bolster both economies. An obvious choice could be nearby Ethiopia, who according to the IMF holds the 65th strongest economy, rather than South Sudan's 153rd ranked economy. Relations with Ethiopia would allow for them to grow their economy while acquiring permanent trade partners. This could be crucial for the further expansion into one day a hopes of a common market. However, the relations are very unstable due to civil war on the eastern border of South Sudan and Ethiopia. Once they resolve the war issues, they can focus on further developing their country and moving forward. I recommend that in order to develop South Sudan, they must first fix their internal problems, while then engaging in new trade relations.
Aid in South Sudan is pretty much all from foreign countries and international organizations that go to alleviate the effects of the civil wars that have occurred there. Additionally, most of the people eat all of their meals that are brought in from foreign aid groups. Moving into foreign direct investment, a key component to getting foreign direct investment would be to bring growth and industrialization to South Sudan. They need air service. Currently, there's no air service in South Sudan from a Sudan-based airline, as they all are banned from flying to the EU. The one airline that does fly, there are a couple airlines that fly to South Sudan, Ethiopian from Addis Ababa and Entebbe, and then Fly Dubai from Dubai. However, the tickets are extremely pricey and not affordable for the South Sudanese people to use. Additionally, the airports are not in great shape to handle passengers. If South Sudan did get more international air travel and kind of beef up their air travel service, the IATA, which is a big international organization, says that it would help create 155,000 jobs and 1.3 billion in annual GDP for the country. Now, like I said, South Sudan doesn't have its own airline, so they'd need a foreign airline to come in and invest in this. The best chance of having that happen would be Ethiopian Airlines. It's a world-class airline that is based in Addis Ababa, which is pretty close to South Sudan, and they're financially stable, have a good safety record, and are very good at connecting other African countries to the rest of the world.
A major issue South Sudan is currently facing is extended conflicts in and outside its borders. The renewed conflicts in December 2013 and July 2016 have undermined the development gains achieved since independence and worsened the humanitarian situation. In order to renew investment in their current comparative advantages such as crude oil, mining, scrap metals, and the textile industry, South Sudan should limit conflicts within its borders. The main challenge going forward is to ensure all parties to the conflict remain committed to implement the new peace agreement. Next, the government will be expected to tackle causes of the country's current macroeconomic crisis, improve food production, boost employment, build infrastructure, and diversify the economy.
South Sudan's economy continues to collapse, with output contracting and inflation and parallel exchange market premiums soaring. Monetization of the fiscal deficit led to strong money growth and high inflation, although there are indications that borrowing from the Bank of South Sudan had recently been limited. South Sudan has attracted a lot of investments in the banking sector from the East African region. There are also growing banks locally owned by the South Sudanese themselves. As of May 2016, the number of commercial banks licensed and rendering bank services in South Sudan, as regulated by the Bank of South Sudan, is unknown. The banking industry continues to attract a lot of interested players to promote more growth and development in South Sudan. South Sudan's largest bank, KBC, shut down more than 3 branches as hyperinflation and shortage of dollars decreased the group's profits, underscoring the country's worsening financial situation due to the civil war. As of September 2018, the World Bank active portfolio in South Sudan stands at $233 million, covering 5 national IDA operations with an undisturbed balance of 15%.